Hi, welcome to the Aruba OS 8.3 how-to video series. This is going to be the fifth video of the 15-part series that covers the configuration of an L3 redundant mobility master. Now, if we look at the architecture from before, what we've set up so far are the two mobility masters with VRRP between them. What we want to do now is to add a layer 3 mobility master. This could be a mobility master that is located in another data center or located on a different layer 3 network from the existing DC1 mobility masters, so that if I wanted to have some kind of offsite failover or redundancy capability over or across a different layer 3 network, so long as the mobility controllers in each data center can reach this second mobility master over L3, then there is a process by which if both of these mobility masters fail, then these controllers have a backup to go to at a different site. Now I will add that at least for right now, at least through AOS 8.3, the configuration of an L3 mobility master is all done through the command line. So we're not going to be using the GUI for any of our configuration today. I would also like to point out that if you go to the Aruba Solutions Exchange, which we can go to here, if I go to ase.arubanetworks.com, when you look at the Aruba Solutions Exchange, there is a mobility master setup guide where you can basically walk through at the command line level how to configure your mobility master redundancy by simply just adding in a few bits of information, and it'll ask you some questions about what you need, what needs to be set up, etc. So I highly recommend using this ase.arubanetworks.com. It's solution ID number 146, or you can just search for mobility master redundancy. So the first things that we're going to do here is I'm going to get into config T mode. Now I'm going to configure the elements that I need on the two mobility masters that are in data center 1. The first thing we need to do is to enable master L3 redundancy, and that will put us into the master redundancy configuration state. The first thing that we will enter is the L3 sync state priority. And this is basically where you define whether this member is the primary or the secondary. So in this case, it's going to be the primary. And that means that he should be always the one that is active, and the only time that the secondary would take over is if the primary is down. Primary also defines as a role whether you can do config management or not. So if the primary mobility master fails and the secondary mobility master goes active, the only thing that secondary mobility master will do is manage the services, but it will not allow for things like configuration change. If you need to make a configuration change on the secondary, you would need to promote it to a primary. The second command that we do is the L3 sync state time. Oops, I'm going to type right. It's hard to type and talk at the same time. There we go. And this is defined in hours. Now the value you can set is between 2 and 24 hours. So we're going to go ahead and say every 2 hours I want to sync my primary mobility master to the secondary. The third command that we need to do is define the peer IP address, which in this case, if we look back in our drawing, is going to be this 150.51. So I'm going to do 192.168.150.51. This is going to be the mobility master in the DC2 environment. It's also going to ask for an IPsec key, which we'll just go ahead and enter as this. Now once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and do a write mem. So this is all that we need to do on the first mobility master. On the second mobility master, we're going to do more or less the same thing. We're going to do we need to do master L3 redundancy. Whoops, I need to go into config mode first. And then I can do, now I will enter the L3 sync state primary. Now remember, in an L2 mobility master deployment, only one of them is active at a time, and because he is the backup of the VRRP, then he is not technically active. But if he were to be active, he would be a primary node. We also need to do an L3 sync time of 2 hours, and then we need to do an L3 peer IP address 192.168.150.51, IPsec. We'll use the same key, and we'll do a write mem. Now on the secondary mobility master, this is the one that is in DC2, so we're talking about this guy here. We're going to go ahead, do the exact same thing. The commands are going to be a little bit different, but we're going to stay in my node. We're going to enter master L3 redundancy. We will do the L3 sync state secondary. We're going to do an L3 sync time of 2 hours, and then we'll do the L3 peer of 192.168.200.50. Now notice, because the VRP address exists between these two, we want to make sure that this guy is pointed at whoever owns this IP address for tracking. So we're going to use that. We're going to use the same command as before, and we'll go ahead and do a write mem. Now, for all intents and purposes, our L3 mobility master configuration is now complete. The secondary mobility master is pointed at the VIP of the two primaries. The primaries know to look towards the secondary as another peer to receive requests from. So what we're going to do now, because within the GUI, if we were to look, let me go ahead and drag this guy where we can actually see where we're going. If we do 168.200.51, we'll go ahead and log in. I want to point this out because this is kind of a known deficiency. We're working on getting it fixed, but it'll probably come in AOS 8.4, that the secondary mobility master does not show up in this list. That is a known behavior, so we're going to walk through the commands to kind of verify that things are actually working at the command line. But as of right now, there is nothing in the GUI that shows whether this works. Additionally, if I were to do a show switches, whoops, I need to be on MM1. If I were to do a show switches, I still just see the two mobility masters. I haven't added any mobility controllers yet. So what we need to do, there's some commands that we can check. For example, on the primary mobility master, we can do a show master redundancy, and it tells you that this guy is the master. If we do a show master redundancy here, it tells you that the master switch redundancy is not configured, because remember, we only have master redundancy existing between these two. L3 mobility master is set up a little bit different. We can also, though, do a show master L3 redundancy. Whoops, need to put a space there. Show master L3 redundancy. This tells you that while this guy is the L2 master, this is the L3 primary. So we'll come over here, we can do a show master L3 redundancy, and you can see that this is defined as the secondary and his peer is .50. This guy's peer is .51, 150.51. So this is what we want to see. So what I'm going to do, because I don't want to wait 2 hours for this to sync, I'm going to go ahead and just do a synchronized database. Actually, I need to get out of config mode. If I could type. There we go. Whoops, did it already. Now what this is going to do is this forces a mobility master database synchronize with the L2 backup as well as the L3 secondary. So what I want to do after I give this a few minutes to kind of run, I want to do a show database synchronize. And this is going to show me some bits of information that I want to see. For example, I can see that one L3 synchronization has attempted. I've had no failures. So that's a good sign. If I want to do a show database synchronize over here, I see the exact same thing. I see one L3 attempted, no failures. So I know now that these are all talking. Additionally, I can also do a show crypto. If I could type crypto IPsec SA. Now what this is going to show me is all of the IPsec tunnels that are open and existing between controllers on this mobility master. And so you can see there is an IPsec tunnel established to MM2. There's also an IPsec tunnel that's established to Mobility Master 3 over in DC2. This is our L3 backup. This is our L2 backup. So everything is up and running. We're seeing everything that we want to see. Some other commands that could be of use if we do a master L3 redundancy. Oops, sorry about that. Show master L3 redundancy. And you can see some other commands here. We can do a config, we can do a status. Oh, sorry, this would be a command that you would run on the managed controllers to be able to see. So we'll run those when we set up the mobility controllers themselves. But for all intents and purposes, we see that we have L3 synchronization attempting and working with no failures. I can go ahead and do this one more time just to kick it off. And then I can do a show database synchronize, and you can see that 2 attempted, no failures. So everything's working the way we expect it to work. I have an L2 synchronization that occurs between the 2 MMs at DC1 every 60 minutes, and then every 2 hours I have a complete replication over to the L3 Mobility Master standby. So that's pretty much all you need to do for Layer 3 Mobility Master configuration. Granted, it's all in the command line. Unfortunately, we're working on getting that moved over to the GUI, but for now, this is the process. If you have any questions or run into any problems, certainly reach out to the online help boards like community.arubanetworks.com or reach out to your local Aruba SE or partner. Thank you.